Hello and welcome to the Mindful Messenger Show brought to you by the Liberty Beacon Media Project. My name is Amanda Johnson and today we are talking to Rick Amitin about mindful leadership. Rick is a writer, author, blogger, poet, inspirational speaker, and founder of rickamitin.com. He's a former contributing columnist for Read My Mind magazine and has published articles on various platforms. He's traveled extensively as an evangelist, pastored for many years, and built a multi-million-dollar insurance business in Los Angeles before embarking on the journey of personal transformation. A certified behavioral analyst and a transformational life coach, he has attended numerous seminars in personal development with some of the leading voices of our time: Ford Taylor, Jack Canfield, Sanford G, Kulkin, and Kevin Knebl. Name a few. Rick is a former member of the Dallas-Fort Worth Writers Workshop and the Writers Guild of Texas, as well as a lifelong student, avid reader, and researcher. He is a father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. He's been married to his wife, Tina, for 36 years and resides in San Francisco, California. Welcome, Rick.
Hey, Amanda. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited about this talk. I was sharing earlier that the last 6 weeks have been really intense for me, and it's been around the topic of leadership and who do I want to be in the world and how am I going to play and and so much of the work around this I did while I was working with you on your book. It's just, we explored so much of it together. So I'm excited to have you here sharing your immense amounts of wisdom with this audience. So.
Yeah, great. Thanks for mentioning that. But yeah, you are my book coach, and so we did go through that journey together, and it was exploratory in the making. It was a moving situation, and so yeah, we definitely have some experience together.
We did a lot of work together, my friend. Yeah,
yep, we did.
But let's talk about the beginning of this journey of wanting to be a messenger. And I know for you, it goes way back, like to this dream when you were a kid, right?
Yeah, I remember, very precisely. I was about 10 years old. It was a Sunday morning church service in a Pentecostal church. For people who aren't familiar with that, lots of emotion, lots of participation, and it's very common to have this feeling, what we call the presence of God, come over a congregation and see many people respond to it. And I remember this particular Sunday morning, it was that kind of an environment. And I remember standing there and being very observant and somewhat apprehensive and affected by what I saw happening with all of the adults. And many of them were weeping. They began to move down toward the front of the church near where our altar was, and they were kneeling down. And I remember this thing going on, and not sure what to do with it. And then it affected me, and I felt it and started crying and moved toward the front like so many others were. A couple hundred people, I'm sure, or more that day. And it seemed like as I yielded to it, it just became that much more intense. And I didn't have a clue at 10 years old what was really going on. But after some minutes of just burying my face in my hands and weeping uncontrollably, I felt this arm around me and this booming voice, which was my pastor. And even though he was trying to whisper, he said, "Rick, are you okay?" And had I thought about it, I probably never would have said it. But I shocked myself by looking up at him and saying, "Pastor, I think I'm called to preach." I didn't know how he was going to respond to that, but I will never forget his response. His response was, "Rick, I think you are called to preach." Mm-hmm. Now, the only context that I could put it in at that time And what began for me that day, because of that context, took me down the long road of ministry. But it was more than that now that I understand it more fully. But it was this messenger feeling that was never, ever going to leave me, whatever context it was. But yeah, that was the day.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of that messenger business. I mean, you've spent what, 30, 40 years between that day and the day you called me up and said, okay, I think I need help with this book. So what compelled you to actually start to write the book and start to share your message?
Well, my life certainly was anything but a straight line. You know, I appreciate these purebred people who seem to know early on what they're going to do with their life and go straight at it, and there's never an interruption. That doesn't mean they don't face challenges and difficulties, but there was like never ever a question in their mind as to what they were going to do with their life. Mine was very up and down, and it probably had a lot to do with my upbringing and the multiple broken homes and things that I went through, and the destabilization of my development. You know, I was abandoned by my dad, 3 stepfathers by the time I was 9. I lived with an uncle, lived with my grandmother for the majority of the time. My mom would get remarried. We'd end up back there. That would break up. We were scattered, you know. And so there was not this like straight line for me. And so, you know, I've taken some comfort in realizing that I might be a mutt more than a thoroughbred, and I'm okay with that. And so, you know, I was molested early, which just triggered all kinds of other things, you know, in my life. And then, you know, I was arrested in development, struck out on my own at 15 to try to get away from the life that I was living that I didn't want to live. But this faith connection now that I had just never left me. It just always pulling on me. But because that I was abandoned by my dad, I had this concept of, I met him once, I should say, when I was 5, and he came into my life, gave me the 2 best hours, you know, of my then young life, and made all these promises about always being there from then on, that we would fish and play ball together, do all that kind of stuff. So he walks out the door that night. I never see or hear from him again. And that remained the backdrop of my life. All of my stepfathers all got filtered through. You're not him. I have a real dad. He's coming. He said he was. And I grew up with that thought process. But since I think that we are designed to get, at least in part, our first glimpses of God from our fathers, that missing dad translated into a missing God for me. And I mean, I knew my dad was real. I'd met him. I'd experienced him. He was out there somewhere. He just wasn't there for me. But I transferred that to God in my relationship with him. There was no question I had experienced him, that he was real. He was out there somewhere. But I couldn't believe that he was there for me at those deepest levels. I could only go so far with him. I'd run into walls I couldn't climb over. And I would turn toward God, turn away from God, turn toward God, turn away from God. And eventually I got older and firmed up the idea of, this is what I'm going to do, and committed to that. But because my particular religious experience was very fear-based and highly manipulative, I hid some of my dysfunction. I was not honest. I wasn't trying to be deceitful, but I was shame-based, and the fear played right into it. And so I tried to act like everything was okay when it really wasn't. And eventually, I mean, all I wanted to do was get it right. That's just all I wanted. I just to get this right, to make it work, to live in peace and harmony, and make an impact and share everything that I could learn and experience. But I became a product of that culture, and I stayed way past my understanding that this wasn't working for me. And eventually I just had to seek God outside the boundaries of my religious experience.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in my world, when we're talking, we talked a lot about this through the process, because I was raised not in as an intense of a culture as you were, but it still had all of the trappings, the shame, the fear, the manipulation, because how do you get a bunch of people to behave? Right?
Yeah, well, that's part of it. I don't want to be pointed toward the devil. I want to be pointed toward God. So don't be telling me what's wrong. Tell me how I can fix things. And there is this environment and there's this leadership, structure that gets developed. And what I would hear and what I would see didn't match. And that was internally, that was a real conflict for me, because I felt like I became an expert on what love wasn't before I ever understood what love was. And so these things happened, and I just kept being drawn to what was beyond what was in front of me. I mean, I don't know how else to explain it. It's just, I never blamed God for any of this. I never blamed God for what was happening in my personal life, what happened to me as a child, what was happening, in ministry. But I could clearly see that people were having a huge impact on the life that I was living. And I had to reach that place when I looked at it and I saw, okay, you're demanding perfection, but you're not perfect. And so there is something really wrong here. If that's required, why don't you have it? And so, eventually I just kept moving. I never gave up. And I just kept believing that there was an answer, that there was a key, there was a aha moment somewhere that was going to make sense of all that I was experiencing. I'm not sure I answered your question. I think I laid some more background there.
You did. I think that it's all of that is really important to this conversation about leadership, because this idea of being a leader, and, for people who are watching who want to be a leader either as a messenger on pages and stages, or, in the corporate world, like wherever they want to be a leader, the challenge is that everywhere we go, there are people and structures that are imperfect. And what do we do with that? How do we cope? Because we really do want to get it right. For me, words matter a lot, right? I mean, how many times we go back and forth, like, well, what if we said it like this? Because this way has a lot of, undertones of that old fear, manipulation, or like, so I'm so sensitive to that. And because of that, it makes me look at these places that I want to go, these stages that I want to be on, because I feel the same way you did when you were 10 and in your 20s and 30s. Like, there's nothing I love more than being on a stage and feeling what's happening in the room, because I'm sharing my story, that possibility opens for people, and that they can, give themselves some slack and just be honest about the reality that they don't have a lot of time to think about their lives, or they're really frustrated about this area and they're running from it by doing this over here. Like, I know those moments are life defining. because I've had them. And so more of that, please, anytime I can get in front of people. And yet there are these times where I'm on stage and I will hear myself say something that is like an old track.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
like, oh God, that was one of my parents, or that was one of my mentors, and these things, they come out and then I back up because I don't want to create more of a mess than a message. And so for me, like, all of this backstory is really important because it was like, you had this big mission, and there was, because the way it happened to you is like what happened with me with my lightning bolt moment. It's undeniable. You can't just walk away from this, because this is what it was like, this divine anointed moment, and you can't walk away. And yet there's stuff about it that just doesn't feel right. And you push right up against those places where, oh God, I don't want to do it like them. But then what does that mean? How do I do it? And so, and then the pain that it creates, because one, you're judging these other folks, even though you don't want to, because they're human, you want to let them be human. And two, you're hearing yourself say stuff on stage, and you just are like, judging yourself, because why am I still doing this? Why can't I? So tell me about how, like, what changed? And I know that, perfection is a joke, but there was something that happened for you where you were really able to kind of escape that matrix in a way.
Yeah, for me, it was kind of a twofold experience. There were two very dynamic things that came together, but it took time for them to meet. It took too long for them to meet. It took years that it should not have taken, but it was all about interpreting your life events, which we can talk more about in a minute. But what really changed for me was, I was living from childhood with a broken heart. This issue with my dad scarred me. My mom's choices that brought so much pain into our family scarred me. And there's no question I was wounded. And, you have these encounters with mentors. You have these encounters with other leaders. You even have these encounters with God, but you can only interpret all of it based on your level of understanding. And so that's where I was trapped. I couldn't capture this broader understanding, even though I felt like I was being tugged on to pursue it, to go after it. I was too busy surviving in this culture, in this environment, and having no context really for anything beyond what I had experienced. And so in some ways, I was a bit trapped. But eventually, as I started transitioning away from my original religious experience, that's when I entered the business world and built the insurance business. But those transitions can be very dangerous and tricky. And what happened was I was unfaithful to my wife. It was the last thing that I ever wanted to do. And it broke my heart, my own heart, because I faced the pain. And anything that anybody had ever done to me, all of the pain that had ever been caused to me by other people, just faded into the background. It could no longer compete with the pain that I had caused. And that became a defining moment, and a change began to take place. It got worse before it got better, because I withdrew from life. and really became a shell of the person that I had been. And it wasn't until my grandson was born that the second part of the story met. Okay, now I'm in this place where I don't have this hope that everything's going to work out, even though I had a tough beginning and all of these early childhood experiences. Now I was without hope because I felt like I had done worse than anybody had done to me, and I didn't know what to do with that. You want to go jump out of a window somewhere, or drown yourself, or how do you confront it? And I mean, it changed me, fundamentally. But when my daughter Monica, announced that she was pregnant, her fiance bolted, and Jaden's father decided he didn't want to be in his life. So for 9 months, I contemplated the birth of this child. And I knew, because of his circumstances now, he was going to deal with the plight of the fatherless like I had. And I saw a family dynamic repeating itself. And I was very angry about it. I was determined to do something about it. Now, I had shifted out of religion, but I was not ever shifting away from God. But it was all very transitional for me. And as I spent, a lot of time thinking about the birth of this boy, I envisioned how it was going to happen. When they brought me to my mother in the hospital, I don't remember this, but I was told this story, that she had a tough birth, and so I was pretty marked up. And when she had this vision of a dark complected child with dark hair and, those kinds of features, and I'm anything but that. I'm very fair skinned and light haired. Now it's brown and gray, but it used to actually be red. And she said, "That's not my son. You better go get my son." Well, I don't know why they ever told me that, but they told me, and it stuck with me. Yeah. And my mom cleared that up for me some years later, but she didn't not want me. But it didn't change anything. I had lived with that feeling for so long. But I was determined that when this child was born, he wasn't going to feel anything like that. He was going to have a red carpet reception. He was going to enter this world with the most positive vibe that was possible. And I was determined to do that. So I was able to be in the delivery room with my wife and daughter. And, ordinarily when baby's born, they take the baby and clean him up, get him ready, and give it to the mother, give him to the mother. And she was still having some difficulties, and they were still working with her at the time that they got Jaden ready. And so I was standing there hovering over him, watching every move that they made. I wanted to hear his sounds. I wanted to see his movements. I was zeroed in on a mission here. And just because of what happened, they handed him to me. And I took him, and I began to use every word I knew to bless him every way I could. And it was in that moment, sorry,
okay,
still a little touching, but it was in that moment when I was pouring my love out on that little baby, 52 years old, preached to thousands. And for the first time in my life, I knew how God felt about me. I knew how he felt about all of us. And so that's when the brokenness met the healing. And as those two things began to work together in my life, is when I decided to write the book.
Yeah. It's so funny as I listen to you telling your story, I think about all of these hilarious moments that we had, the similar lightning bolt moment, just knowing what we were here to do. And then, I've had so many people ask me, like, how did you do this? How did you make this decision? Like, this stuff usually takes people a long time to break out of this type of relationship. And for me, the answer always comes back to my kid. Like, because it's the motivation to make sure that he knows who he is and doesn't have to wait until he's 27 to get a glimpse of it, and doesn't have to wait until he's however old to heal numerous stories. I mean, that's the whole game right there.
Yeah, it is. And, some of the adages that we use all the time about, turn your mess into a message. And it sounds great, but anytime you're going to give birth, it's going to be bloody. And we had some bloody moments in the writing of my book. And because I was at a level of authenticity that I had never been at before. I was being healed at the time that I was writing. And so things kept changing on me. And it was like, well, that's not really the truth of that.
So let's really talk about specifics here, because I feel like, watching you go through this process, I don't know why. I think it was, actually, I do know why. I've been watching people for 8 years go through this process. And yet, it was the topic. It was the topic of having the broken relationship with the dad, because during the time, I swear you contacted me like the month that I had made a decision that my relationship with my dad was never going to be the way that I'd hoped. And so then here you come with your manuscript, and I'm like,
yeah, I remember.
Of course, it brings up all my stuff for my own process but what ended up happening was you allowed me, because of your level of authenticity, you allowed me to see my dad on paper. Like, you gave me a different experience of my dad that allowed me to get to a place of compassion for him instead of all the other stuff I was feeling. But in the same breath, remember that day you called me and you said, okay, so you keep saying that this is great and everything, but I don't think you're lying, but I don't feel it from you.
Yeah, I do remember.
And I thought, I was really trying to figure it out, because I was like, this book is brilliant. Like, I love this book. And then I realized it was because I was holding back the closet door full of my stuff that I was working through, because you were sharing as authentically as you did. So I would love for you to talk about, like, your initial idea for the book, how you kind of formulated it and saw it coming out, and how and why that started to change for you.
Well, I thought this was going to be the easiest thing I ever did. I came up with like 12 chapter titles, and I was just taking each of those chapters and writing about that piece of my story, and that I was going to move through it that way. And I think I had about 8 chapters written when you and I connected, and you invited me to the weekend writers retreat. And so I go there not knowing what to expect. And, I don't really know you. We have a mutual connection, but I don't really know you. And, I go there, and the first day right out of the gate, you have this painting exercise, and it just destroyed me. And so it's about, you wanted us to, I think, paint a picture of our life.
Mm-hmm.
and it was watercolors and paper. And I remember looking at that blank page and thinking to myself, there ain't no way. I don't even want to see my life. And you want me to put it on paper? And it was at that moment that I realized that I was bringing the past forward. I really wanted my life. I didn't want what was behind me. I wanted what was ahead of me. So I had to just take a minute. I remember going outside and just thinking, oh, what is this? And then through the workshop and your prompts and guidance and me telling my story, you helped me to shape a entirely different book. I was telling stories. I wasn't telling my story. And I had a lot of story killers in there, and a lot of stuff that really took away from the real message. And so that's your expertise in your field, and so you were very instrumental in helping me through that. So I had 8 chapters written when I went to see you, and when I got home, of course, I had to not necessarily throw it all out, but some of it stayed in the book, much of it didn't. And I had a completely different outline that was actually telling the story. The concept of telling Jaden's story as a parallel to mine was just, it was ingenious. And so, yeah, that's when it changed. It changed for me at the retreat, and working with you, and you seeing my story differently than I was looking at it. That's when it changed, and because I had to step back and say, oh, yeah, I was being very, because my story went like this, I was telling the story like that. And when I needed to find the heartbeat, and so I think we did that. And so it ended up being a much different book than I originally envisioned, but it's not like I had a really clear vision of what it was going to be anyway. I just wanted to get my story out,
Yeah, well, and I think for our audience, those of you who are speakers, this is a challenge because, Rick, I mean, masterful preacher speaker. Like, this man, I mean, half the time through the project, I was like, dude, I need you to use smaller words. Some people are not going to be able, if I have to look it up, we can't use it. And so you're like a master of oration, right? And this is a challenge that so many messenger speakers face when they start to try to shift into the written work, because as an orator, you have one topic for a certain amount of time, and you have your points that you're going to make, and you have, right? Like, there's a way to do it, especially if you're in a place where you kind of have something new on a weekly or monthly basis. There's an approach for that is not contextual. It doesn't have to be contextual, right? It doesn't have to be taking people from this point to this point unless you're doing a series or something. So when you think about writing the book, it does really force you to get super linear, and also it feels very uncomfortable because you're not getting feedback from your crowd. You don't have audience nodding their head or raising their hands or speaking amens, right? To say, yeah, you're on it. And so it makes...
you're missing the interaction, and, there's energy in that.
So
you're not experiencing that, when you're the same, I think you do experience energy, but I don't think you're experiencing that same type of energy. And I a lot of what I was writing would have been great to deliver it, orally.
Oh yeah, it was amazing.
It was not coming out right on paper, I remember you having to work with me to help me understand what you were just explaining.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I published an article later on about what I learned in writing my memoir, From the Stage to the Page, because what I was used to doing very fluidly was not the same in writing, and I had no real bona fide writing experience, and so yeah, it was definitely a process, but it was one I was very happy that I had gone through, and now I understand, so much better of what it should look like and feel like. But here's part of the problem too, is that one of the reasons I became so good at it was just I did it for years. But secondly, I learned something very, very magical. And that is no matter what was going on in my personal life, no matter what was going on around me, I had developed the ability to step into the moment and just be there. I didn't really realize that that's what I was doing, but looking back, I understand that perfectly, that in that moment, I could get in the moment and flow like there was no past or future. It was just the moment. But now I'm telling a story that's steeped, in the past, and I'm trying to tell it in such a way that the future is going to look so much different. And there was no magical moment, to get into, just to be. At first, I didn't see it. I couldn't grasp it, And then eventually I realized, oh, even in the writing, there's this magical moment. It's just different than when you're speaking. It's not high energy. I mean, I've never written a novel or fiction, so I can't really even speak to those experiences. Mine was a memoir. It's a nonfiction, book. And so for me, what was so powerful for me was not only the writing, but it was the message that I was hearing as I wrote. Because I had a lot of answers. In fact, I had a big supply of answers that I didn't have any questions to connect them to. So many times you're answering questions nobody's asking, including myself. To be honest, that wasn't really my question. And so what came out of a lot of the writing was I got questions. I got the best questions I'd ever had in my life. And then realized that, oh, I've had this answer for a long time that didn't help me because I didn't have, the question to fit that into. But as those questions formed, the answers became so fluid. And then, of course, there were answers I discovered that I didn't have because I got the right questions. Yeah, that was there was a lot of that, that was
it happens because I think that's just part of being a true messenger, that can be in a moment. Like, that is such a gift, to be able to be in a moment with an audience or with one person and just be able to let it flow. And it also is just unbelievably horrifying to try to do that while you're writing, if you don't have a really strong structure to make it flow. So, but the piece that I really want to make sure we cover in this interview, because it's about leadership, is this idea of the story killers that we had to face through the process of writing. Because these are the story killers that so many I know I face, and I know so many of the people watching this will face as they sit down to write the book. So I'd love for you to share as much as you're willing to on that topic.
Yeah, to make real progress in your life, I think that we have to get very good at separating the truth from facts. And most of us are so hung up on the facts that the truth gets buried in it because we begin to wrap it in layers of pain. But, you know, for instance, my dad abandoning me after these 2 wonderful hours, just gone, making promises, building it all up, and then completely destroying that. That happened. That's a fact. But none of that had anything to do with me. It was not my fault. I didn't break the promises. I felt unlovable, but the truth is, I was not unlovable. I felt like I didn't deserve what happened. That's a fact. I didn't deserve it. But the truth is, I didn't deserve it. Mm-hmm. And so many of the things that happen in our lives that we get hung up on them, and because we're not seeing the truth of it, the facts become boxes, binders, chains that keep us confined and restricted from spreading our wings and being who we are in spite of it all. And so the facts never set us free. The truth does. And so we have to become very good at understanding the truth of the things that have happened, including the bad decisions that we make, and the pain that we can cause. You know, it's not all about what's happened to us, it's also about what we have done. And that's the whole picture. And so the fact is, I made some really lousy decisions, and I made a lot of, I caused pain. The truth of it is, it really wasn't the real me. And so I had to find those motivators, which always stem back to some wound, some brokenness. And so, you know, we are supposed to get some very basic things, you know, besides food and shelter. We're supposed to receive our affirmation. We're supposed to receive our sense of worthiness. We're supposed to be built up with good expectations about the future. In our childhood, when we don't get those things, it's what I call identity theft. They're gone. You didn't get them. And I find that from dealing with, you know, hundreds of thousands of people now over my lifetime, the vast majority of people are living in the past. And there are times when our broken relationships with our parents can be restored. But there are many occasions when that's not possible. Maybe they're just not available. Maybe they're not interested. Maybe they haven't grown to the place when they could be any different than who they are. Maybe they've passed on. So what do? Do we just sit back and say, that's it, this is the way it is, doggone it, I got a bad deal, you know, I should have had better things, you know, happen to me, but this is the reality of what we're living. So the real power is in realizing that you can parent yourself, and you can restart the maturation process and go on to wholeness and live a rich, rewarding, and fulfilling life. But it does take some work, and but it's worth it. It's your life, and so you either take that and rewrite it, or you just stay on the trajectory that you're on. A little tongue-tied there. So you know, that's what I think. I just think it's very, very possible to take every situation, and I think we see it. I think we see the reality of it from the people who actually do it. And so we look at somebody that's got a story maybe that's much worse than ours, and they just made a choice about it. And you can see that their life is just good, healthy, wholesome, wonderful. They're enjoying it. They're glad they're alive. And then you see other people that they're either trapped, they're just wrapped up in all of the story details and mechanisms, or they've actually developed a romance, with the ugly side of life, and they're not about to give that up. It becomes their lover. It becomes their identity. And they love to tell you all of the stuff that's just so bad and has happened. And you can see that they've just focused on themselves, and it's almost like they've disconnected from the rest of the world. And some of it, I think, maybe some fear in there of, well, if I don't tell this story, who am I? Who will I be if you take this away from me? Well, you might actually be the person you would have been without all of that, if you're willing, to go that process. And so really the details of our life are just essential ingredients for the cake that we're supposed to bake. And so if you want to shy away from your details, you're really shying away from the ingredients that will make you ultimately fulfill your destiny, your reason for coming here. And so, there is certainly an inventory process there. You may not be able to stay connected to all the people who keep you trapped in those circles and environments and things like that. And sometimes even with family, those relationships have to be managed. If people, I love Brene Brown's take on this. She said, you have to earn your right to hear my shit. And so don't everybody doesn't deserve, the intimate details of your life. They don't need to know all of the messiness, because they're not capable of handling that right. And she also talks about people shouldn't love you in spite of your imperfections. They should love you because of them. And this was a good illustration of what my experience had been for the vast majority of my life. And that was, I had to play this game because that kept me acceptable. And I had to hide the stuff that I was scared would cause me to be rejected or to be thrown out. And then, then you realize you're dealing with a God who knows everything there is to know about you, and it doesn't keep him away. He's not who everybody says he is. He's not rejecting me. His unconditional love is the only kind that really exists. And we're just trying to connect to it. Humans don't have this. They have to connect to it. And then when you realize everything's okay with your creator and the author and finisher of your faith, anybody else, I'll miss you. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Yeah, and there were a lot of those characters that we had to face through the process. All of the, I forget your 3Ms. Probably not appropriate to share at least one of them, but
Munchkins, mentors, and lovers.
Oh my God, I think I spit my coffee out when you sent that to me the first time.
Yeah, I think we were both on the floor that day, but it's so true. And the thing is, when you're really trying to work things out in your life, and you get these people who come in who have ability, they have something to share with you, and then you realize, they're just human beings, and they have their own flaws, and imperfections, insecurities, personalities, and because of their humanity, they can hurt you as much as they can help you. And so I think that's just a part of maturing, gaining your experience and wisdom. And I don't have anybody on a pedestal anymore.
Mm-hmm. But isn't it interesting? Do you ever see yourself defaulting that way, or is it less for you now? Because I was in a workshop with someone who I really respect in this space, and I was listening to them, and I had these two experiences at the same time. The first experience was they were talking, and they're very elevated leader because of their knowledge and their accomplishments, and so while they were sharing all of this stuff, I was in the back of the room thinking, Amanda, what is wrong with you? You know all this stuff. Why do you keep telling yourself that you're a bad business owner and that you don't know enough about? Like, everything this person is saying. And then that person shifted gears and started talking about the the underbelly aspect of it, the dark side of these parts of the business and how it can go wrong. And when they did that, I literally watched a part of myself bow energetically. Like, it was like I was outside of my body watching, and I went, oh no, you don't. Like, we're not doing that anymore. I'm not bowing to anyone else without also bowing to myself. And that was the gift of that experience. Was I had really acknowledged myself 2 minutes before of like, I pretty much know this stuff. Why am I still giving myself such a hard time? And two, there's still more for me to learn. And there is that part of bowing as a student, the way they do in martial arts. Like, these people have earned their stripes. Listen to them. They are wise. And also, do you find yourself in that camp?
It's much less for me now, just because of the perspective that I have. And I love anybody who can lead me to an aha moment. I love that. But I realize that the aha moment is the truth, not the messenger. And
say that again.
The aha moment is the truth, not the messenger. And
you know how much pressure that puts on a messenger when you think it's the messenger?
Yeah. Well, and that's all ego driven, and we're anytime there's lots of people, high pressure environments, money, all of these things, we have to struggle with keeping the ego in check. And listen, the best compliment I will ever hear from anybody is for them to tell me that they heard something while I was talking that I didn't say. Boom. I've done my job. And so if all you're hearing is me, I'm
so good.
I'm probably going to screw you up. And so please hear the message, not the messenger. So don't let me contribute to,
It sounds like how I parent. Look, kid, I'm going to mess it up.
Yeah.
Just get ready. I'm going to say I'm sorry.
This is the reality of it. I mean, anything that I really have that's of value that I can share with you did not come from my intellect. It sits there so that I can process it out, but that's not where it comes from. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite scriptures is the Spirit speaks expressly. And I can't tell you how many times I've delivered a message and people say, man, you changed my life. What did I say that changed your life? And they'll repeat something back to me. I didn't say that. No way did I say that. That's the message they got in that aha moment. And so aha moments are not you knowing what I know. It's you knowing what you know. And so that's the power of it.
So good. It's so good. Okay. I'm looking at the time and I'm thinking we need like a few more interviews, but I really want you to share this piece about how do you stay mindful, because I know that you've gained a lot of, I mean, like you said, it's happening less and less and everything, but where do you still find your own growing edge, and how do you stay mindful around that in order to create more
I
impact?
am definitely a very devoted varietist. Some people have these solid routines, and that's just what they, what they do. And someone like you, I know you have a few strategies depending on what's going on. But I do kind of require some versatility in keeping myself grounded. I do start every day with 15 minutes of silence. I don't want to turn on the TV. I don't want to get on social media. Sometimes I won't even make the coffee. I just want to sit in the dawn. I just want to feel connected. And so I try to just not think, but just, it's my form of meditation, but I just really I just want to sit until I can feel life. And then it just depends on what's going in and around me, what's going on, what I might do. But, I do love to read the Bible. And I make that a part of my early morning routine. There are times when I want to be out, and the water's edge is a favorite place for me. It's a little harder here in San Francisco to find those private spots, but anytime I can go and there's not a lot of people, and I just get this, it's like I feel the current, and I love that energy and all the mystery around the water and the life and the death and the, and the fun and the danger. It's all in that water's edge. And so I feel those, those energetic experiences. That really helps me. And then, I find a routine that I've adopted about a year and a half ago. Maybe it's been a little longer than that, but there are three things that I look for in every day. And if I find them, I consider the day uh, uh, successful, no matter what else has gone on. But I look for the cry. I
You
want
got
to,
that today.
what that?
See? I said you got that
Yeah.
today.
I want to cry to the point that I know that my empathy is engaged, and I want to keep that always fresh and current. I want to laugh, not just chuckle, but that old belly laugh that just makes your stomach hurt. I want to laugh so hard that I can't hardly stand it. I look for that, and then I look for something to celebrate, either in my life or somebody else's. Even if it's something as simple as wishing somebody a happy birthday. So those things, I find that if I always look for those and I want those things to be a part of my day, I stay very grounded. And if I get too far away from those three little aspects, I can go wonky pretty fast. I'm focusing on something that's really taken me away from what just keeps life light for you.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's really too heavy. We all should be having more fun than we are. And so we get we just let it all go too far at times.
Yeah.
And so just it's the simple things for me. And some people can meditate for 3 hours. That's probably never going to happen in my lifetime.
Me neither.
Not for me. So yeah, it's a few things like that, that I do to help myself balance. I mean, if something really comes out of nowhere and catches me, off guard and it's in my face and I have to be confronted by it, sometimes I'm like many people, and I may not handle it right initially, but then I know immediately how I have to recover,
Mm-hmm.
and so I really want to be to the place when nothing really devastates me. It may be big, but it's not the end of the world. And so just being able to process all of that.
Yeah. Well, I have my last few rapid fire questions for you.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
This is such a fun time for me to learn about messages and resources and messengers that I haven't even heard about. So I'd love to know, what was the first book or message that changed your life and why?
I don't want to sound, overly spiritual here, but I mean, the Bible still remains my favorite book. It's the book that has given me the most insight, expanded my understanding, brought the most peace and joy into my world. And so that does still remain, the number one book. And the message of that is my favorite, messenger. But aside from that, the first book that really changed me as I was transitioning away from religion into something that I would now call spirituality is a book called There Were Two Trees in the Garden by Rick Joyner.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably read the book 3 times, just one right after the other. I read it, and I'm like, wait, what? And I went back and read it again, and I'm like, this is blowing my mind. So I went back and, read it again. And, it answered a lot of questions for me. And it also left me with a few questions. And of course, like with every writer, there were some things in there that I didn't 100% agree with and still don't. But there was so much insight that jumped off the pages of that book to me that I'm like, wow, wow. It just really took my understanding and stretched it way out.
Nice.
So that was one. And then the second book along with that really affected me was Wayne Dyer's book on There's a Spiritual Solution to Every Problem. That was another one that really just made me relax into, everything's all right, man. Just, figure it out, take some steps. And so, yeah, those books really changed me.
And who's your favorite messenger?
That is a tough one for me because I do have some very
Okay, top 3.
Brene Brown would actually top my list right now. I mean, she really is. I think somebody that is incredibly authentic, vulnerable, transparent, and I think she really speaks to the human experience like few people do.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would put her out there. Wayne Dyer, I would include him in there, no doubt about it. And even though I have some major differences, Oprah has still, she's still. I would include her in there, not so much from her personal message, but the way that she brings stuff together and it exposes us to, so many things.
Yeah. I love it. Thank you so much for being on the show today, for sharing, for making me cry. I guess that's what I get for making you so angry at that first retreat.
Yeah, it's revenge.
And of course, I want to thank my listeners for joining us. I'd love to hear from you and hear how this message affected you. And of course, I need to thank my sponsor, sitechisel.com, because they are offering an amazing 10% discount to my listeners with the code mindful10. So that's a wrap for today. Thanks so much, Rick.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.